Kitty's talk tape and a talk on tape called As I've Loved You. And it inspired me so much in my life. And we are doing a renovation in our home, and we cleaned it out, and that talk tape went to DI by accident. So I went to all the DIs that we had delivered things to, trying to find my talk tape that I love, and could not find it. So I got on eBay and found her book and bought it and sent it to my home, where I read it to my girls. And while we were reading it on a Hope on the Hill meeting day, we hadn't picked our keynote speaker at that point, and we were reading it, and we came to the part where she talks about how much she loves our veterans and how much they meant to her, and how she shared her love for that with her children, and how they stood, I think it was on the Golden Gate Bridge, and waved as the Vietnam vets came in. And I knew, I'm getting chills now, because I knew that she was our keynote speaker. I know her story well enough that I could give this talk tonight, but I'm gonna let Kitty do it, because she has the personal heart and experience, but you're gonna find it's truly amazing. She is also married to Colonel Paul M. Bonds, who spent 32 years in service and was in the 82nd Airborne Division and was a retired full colonel. So she has her own private veteran here with her as well. So please give her a warm welcome, Kitty de Ruyter Bonds.
Hello, everybody. What an honor it is to be able to address some of you who are the veterans of the United States military. Those that know me well know how much I love and respect those who have served or are now serving in the military of the greatest country on earth. You don't know how grateful I am for your service and your sacrifices. I'm truly humbled that I've been asked to share with you some of my personal experiences while my family and I had been incarcerated in a Japanese concentration camp in Indonesia during a period in World War II, and to illustrate how we were able to endure and overcome difficult and perilous times, and to point out my eternal gratitude to the United States military. Before and during this war, my family lived on the island of Java. My parents owned coffee and rubber plantations and a rubber manufacturing plant. Each of us children had a personal nanny who watched over us. My nanny used to call me Ite Petite instead of La Petite, the nickname my mom had given me. Because, you see, from all the siblings, I'm still, unfortunately, the tallest, the fattest, and the biggest of all my mother's children. They used to call me, and that's why she called me Ite Petite. And because there were no public schools in the remote area we lived in, my parents hired tutors to teach their 6 children, but then felt the need that the school-age children of their servants and other living in the native village should be educated alongside of us. So they remodeled the left side of the home into classrooms to accommodate all the children. And we loved having so many children to play with on our property. My mother was a pharmacist and provided emergency medical aid to the native Indonesians. Her black bag was filled with medical instruments, medicine, syringes, bandages, razor blades, scissors, sewing and suture kits, and 2 hair clippers that you don't have to plug into the electricity. We're always ready to take with her whenever anybody in the village needed some medical aid. My mom had those hair clippers in the bag because as soon as she would come into the village, the little boys would queue up and asked her, or actually begged her for a haircut. And she would always have a coconut shell or a rice bowl with her. And then when they were there, she put it on their head, take those clippers and clip their hands around it, and they thought that was a cat's meow. Well, how often I wish that Mommy still could part the veil from heaven to look down and see that her haircut is still very much in vogue today. So you could tell that my early childhood was very happy, carefree. We had plenty to eat and to drink. We had many native friends to play with. We had a beautiful home and peaceful surroundings until this peace was abruptly destroyed when World War II erupted. After the Japanese bombarded Pearl Harbor, their navy headed southwest in search for oil, and of course Indonesia, which is rich in minerals and oil, was overrun within a few weeks. The Japanese, being organized, first put all the Dutch military personnel behind barbed wire in POW camps, then incarcerated all Europeans in concentration camps, except those that could prove that they were German or Italian citizens. Sometimes there were not enough camps available, and therefore the Japanese would come in a neighborhood and confiscated all the homes, chasing all the people out of there and putting the internees in there. My father was able to escape and formed a resistance force among the Dutch Indonesians. Under his leadership, this group destroyed vital bridges, buildings, and did extensive damage to the Shell oil refineries in Sumatra. He even destroyed the machinery in his own rubber manufacturing plant, which was not an easy task, as that was part of his livelihood. But his loyalty to the crown, his queen and country was beyond reproach, and as was maintaining his honor that came foremost. He was a good man who taught us to have pride in patriotism, to love our country and to defend her, as he eventually paid the ultimate price with his life for the safety and freedom of others. What is this freedom that we struggle with each day and often take for granted, even though many died giving their lives, sacrificing the full use of their body, their minds, and their strength? The American Heritage Dictionary gives us a definition. Freedom is a condition of being free of restraint, free of movement, free of oppression or incarceration. It is a possession of one's civil rights. It is an exemption from unpleasant condition. It is to have the capacity to exercise choice and free will. It is the right of enjoying all privileges of membership or citizenship. It is also the power to act, to speak, or to think without the imposition of restraint. I know what it's like not to be free, as I have been on the other side of the spectrum. The reason that our family had been, being Dutch Indonesian descent, was put in a concentration camp was in retaliation of my father's underground activity. I'm so sorry. The reason that our entire family, being Dutch Indonesian descent, was put in a concentration camp was in retaliation of my father's underground activities. My three brothers, at the time ages 17, 15, and 13, were immediately separated from us and put in camps for boys, and were not privileged to have my mother's influence and guidance. They had to survive on their own and suffered much. As you can imagine, life in a concentration camp was not pleasant. We were fed only a day, usually a handful of rice, in a watery soup without any protein. Being in the tropics, we combat the heat and humidity, and were constantly thirsty, but could get water only twice a day. We lived in close quarters. There was no privacy. We had to deal with rats and flies and fleas, dirt, filth, and horrible stench. The latrines were always crowded and filthy. no showers to clean us. There was no medical aid to speak of, and therefore there were many sick and hungry people. We had to deal with cruelty, depression, deprivation, inflicted pain, unfairness, besides the struggle with hunger and thirst. To live, it was always noisy as the Dutch women were arguing about little petty things. It was so degrading to live under those circumstances and so depressing. Some behaved as they had lost their sense of humanity, and we saw people stealing food from the dying, but also from their own little children to fill their own empty bellies. The first time we witnessed this kind of behavior and commented on it, my mother set us down. She was very disappointed in us. She said, "Children, why do you stand in judgment over these people? Don't let me hear you criticize another human being ever again. Only God knows why these poor souls cannot restrain themselves to combat hunger that plagues us all. He only knows what goes on in their heart. You need to leave judgment up to God, but as far as for us, let us try to see the good in all people. We are all God's children. He loves all of us, and no matter who we are or what we look like." When I think back on those times, it is my mother's courage and example that takes the forefront. It was my mother's unfailing Christian faith, her hope for a brighter future in freedom, that helped us through this deploring and difficult time. God will prevail, she'd say. Let me give you some examples. When the Japanese issued an edict that was forbidden to hold any form of worship to a god other than the Japanese emperor, to the point that even the Roman Catholic nuns interned with us had to take off their habits, their rosaries and crosses taken away, many Bibles confiscated and burned. My mother made us get up early in the morning to quietly leave the barracks and to walk to the outskirts of the compound, to kneel down and pray, thanking God for every day in our lives, for food and water and protection. Then she asked him to watch over the boys and my dad to sustain them in their hour of need. Our mother taught us that we are to obey the laws of the land, but if these laws infringed on the laws of God, then we are to follow God's laws, no matter the consequences. People questioned us why she'd risk our lives to pray to a God that apparently did not hear us nor cared about us. Otherwise, we would not still be in this predicament. Wisely, my mom ignored those remarks, and instead she continued to talk to us about things of the Spirit that brought us comfort, hope, and peace of mind by telling us stories out of the Bible by heart, because being seen reading out of the Scriptures would have been too dangerous. She reminded us every day that we are to love our enemies, bless them that curse you, and do good to them that hate you, and pray for them that despitefully use you and persecute you, so that we may be called the children of our Father in heaven. For he makes us the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. How she knew her scriptures and could derive great strength from them, particularly in her own hour of need. She also counseled us that in order to survive, we are to shame our oppressors by proving to them with our speech and our actions and conduct that we are better human beings. One time, my mother was able to prevent some 60 young women between the ages of 14 and 18 to be used as prostitutes by the Japanese, who were celebrating a holiday, by her ingenuity and courage. Our barracks was commanded to provide for only 28 young women, but it was very difficult for her to choose which ones had to be sacrificed, and therefore she decided to ask for help, hoping that the mothers of the children would volunteer. But only 6 women dared to come forward, 3 of them Roman Catholic nuns. Everyone else was so afraid for reprisal. The women made all the 60 girls, there were 60 in our barracks, very unattractive, by shaving and cutting their hair with the scissors, the razor blades, the hair clippers, and the sharp medical instruments out of her mother's black bag that was never taken away from her. The girls were encouraged to smear their bodies with mud and to apply sap from leaves of a bush that my mother knew about, that was not only poisonous, but also gives off an awful, reeking, foul, stinking odor. So at the appointed time, there stood some 60 young women, well-shaven, dirty, and awful reeking, waiting for the Japanese to claim their prizes. The sight and the smell repulsed them, and a punishment was inevitable. The sentries took my mom and the 6 adults that had helped her, led them on a podium for everyone to see, then proceeded to rip their clothing off their bodies, ridiculing them in public, humiliating and shaming them with their actions. The sentry pointed to my mother, demanding why she had done this wrong against the Japanese imperial forces, but he made a mistake by placing a bullhorn against her mouth, and she was had the courage to testify to her captors that her God had sanctified some things in our lives, and virtue was one of them. We have been commanded to live virtuous lives, and violation of the law of chastity are grievous sins in the eyes of my God, and we will protect this virtue at all cost, even unto death. Of course, this answer was unacceptable, and so they proceeded to slap and kick my mother merciless, then bound her with her arms over her head against a flagpole so that she would be defenseless, continuing their abuse. They asked her if she were a true Christian and was willing to die for this cause, and she answered that she would. Then a samurai sword was drawn, and we feared that she would be beheaded, as we had witnessed many beheadings before. But instead of that, the cross was cut deeply in her bare back. They continued beating her, and this time using a belt. The buckle of the belt got stuck where the two cuts of the crosses met and ripped out a piece of flesh. Mommy did not cry, as she seemed to have full control over her body. But finally they cut her loose and she fell forward on the ground. Slowly she stood up, but in a flash another sentry kicked her in the belly and she fell down again. At last she was able to stand erect, facing her tormentors directly in the eyes. Now some of you might understand that in the Oriental culture it is expected to show respect and submission by lowering one's head and thereby avoiding to look one's superior directly in the eyes. Mommy purposely ignored those courtesies. For some reason, the other ladies were dismissed, but my mother was sentenced to 2 weeks in a pit. The pits are holes dug deep in the ground where one can stand up or you can squat down, but you can never lie down because they are not wide enough. The top is covered with thick chicken wire, and one fastened on all sides. One has to stay in one's own fill. Food and water are thrown into the pit, and one is reduced to be lower than a caged animal. Usually, one sentenced to the pit will not survive because of the physical, emotional, and psychological abuse that one has to go through. The pit becomes the burial place, as it will be filled with dirt, and without taking the body out to be put in a coffin. Again, my mother was concerned about others more than herself, and she was so anxious about her children's survival without her. After the sentence was pronounced, Mommy looked for us in the multitude and then beckoned us to come to her, using the more gentle way to summon, because she also knew that doing this way is very offensive in the Oriental culture. We ran to her, then she wiped the blood off her face with the cloth given to us by an older lady, covered some of her naked body with it, then bent down to look at us in the eyes by lifting our chins up to hers and asked us to remain faithful and to sustain her with our prayers. I need you children to be brave and obedient, to continue to pray to our God, to bless you and to protect you while I'm away from him. Then ask him to please have mercy on me and to bless me with inner strength so that I may survive this ordeal and can come back to continue to be your mom here on earth until you're capable to take care of yourself. Of course, we watched and sustained her in her hour of need with our prayers, and through the grace of the Lord, she survived. Our faith had been tested and proved when Mommy came out of that pit alive. Her feet and her legs were swollen 3 times their normal size. Her mouth was parched and her eyes were swollen shut. There were live maggots in the open wounds in her bare back. Someone mercifully put a sheet over her soiled body. Then Mommy walked slowly and awkwardly towards us. But when she opened her arms, inviting us to come to her, we flew into her arms. When I felt the warmth of her body so close to mine, I knew that Heavenly Father loved us and was mindful of us, even in this God-forsaken camp. My mother was lovingly washed with water, collected by the women who had sacrificed their washing water to bathe my mother with. As soon as my mother was cleaned up, the first thing she did was go on her knees in the open to give thanks to God the Father for preserving her life by sending rain that had come 3 times during this usually dry season. She was able to collect clean rainwater by scraping dirt from the wall of the pit and to make a shelf for a drinking cup to stand on so she could catch this heavenly water so that it would not intermingle with the filth that she was standing in. She also was able to catch pieces of food and water as it was thrown into the pit with her open mouth without wasting to mouth. At midday, a breeze would come that moved a nearby tree, which branches would shade her, giving her just a short relief from the hot tropical sun. Oh, how we loved Heavenly Father for taking care of our mother. Well, as usual, that same afternoon, we had to stand in line to receive our daily food and water ration. My mother could barely stand, let alone walk, but she needed the nourishment. I could tell that she was in much pain and discomfort. Seeing her like that made the hatred in my heart for those responsible grow. I was out of control. And when I passed the officer overseeing the procedure, I threw my cup of water into his face. I spat at him, humiliating him, and of course he immediately drew his sword to defend his honor and to punish me. My mother put both her hands on the sword, cutting her hands deeply as she pushed it away from me, begging me to pick up the cup and to apologize. But I stood there frozen with fear because I realized that when a weapon is drawn, whether it be a rifle, a club, a stick, or a sword, it will be used, and I feared for the worst. It was again my mother who became my mediator when she picked up the cup with so much difficulty, bowed deeply as was required when one addresses an officer, and then offered apologies in my name. And she said that I was only a child and had not acquired to discipline and to master my emotions and to please have mercy on me. That if a punishment had to be meted out, that she would take this punishment for me because I was her child. The officer looked at my mother certainly, and it seemed for a long time. Then, without using it, he slowly put back the sword in its sheath, took the cup out of my mother's hands, filled it with water, and said, "Woman, drink." Mommy was so surprised, but gratefully drank the water eagerly. He took a handkerchief out of his pocket, indicating to my mother that she needed to stop the bleeding with it. And then, ever so gently, he took the cup out of her hands, filled it with water, offered it to my mother with both hands and a slight bow, which is a sign of respect, and said it was he who needed to apologize for her for not recognizing the majesty of her womanhood. Because of her courageous interference, it had awakened in him that this war had made a savage out of him, and he had always considered himself an honorable man, a son from most honorable parents, until now, when he was about to strike a child. After this war is over, I hope to return with honor to my very own family in Japan and have become a better man. Thank you for reminding me to conduct myself becoming an officer in the Japanese Imperial Forces. Domo, domo, arigato. Truly, you have the spirit of Bushido in you, my mother reciprocated. And the spirit of Bushido means a warrior with great wisdom, which is the highest compliment one can give to a Japanese warrior. My mother again showed that she was wise, but also that she was well educated, because she knew about things and customs in other cultures and knew how not to offend through ignorance. Gratitude and awe filled my heart, because I discovered what my mother had taught us are true, and we can find the truth recorded in Luke 6:35. But love your enemies and do good, lending, hoping for nothing again, and your reward shall be great, and you shall be called the children of the highest, for he is kind unto the unthankful and to the evil ones. And indeed, therefore all things, whatsoever you would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. When we had been incarcerated for almost 2 years, I received an unexpected visitor. It was my 10th birthday. My mother had wished me a happy birthday that morning and whispered in my ear that she was so sorry that we could not celebrate this day with lemonade and the small fancy cookies that were my favorite. But you know, my child, she said, maybe next year, God willing, we will be able to celebrate your birthday with these sweets and refreshments, and then we'll have a party. Well, when one finds oneself in a difficult situation, such as being incarcerated, there's always this ray of hope that perhaps in a few days, maybe next week or even next month, we will be allowed to leave this camp, be free and go home. But if your own mother, who's your teacher, your mentor, who's supposed to comprehend all things, does not know for sure, but there is most likely the possibility that we'd still be in this camp for at least another year, then your world collapses and you lose hope. A chilling feeling came over me, and that's when I decided to leave this camp, even if it would cost me my life. I could no longer stay here, and because it was my birthday, I could do anything I wanted with my life, I reasoned. And so I wandered away from my mother's work detail and strolled towards the smaller gate on the east side of the camp. Suddenly, I was maybe 6 meters away, and suddenly I thought I heard someone call my name, Kitty, Kitty, and then it, over here. I immediately knew that my nanny, who took care of me when I was a little girl, was calling me, because only she would call me by that nickname, it, that she had given me years ago. I looked around, and then I saw her, crouched in the underbrush on the other side of the barbed wire. There she was, my nanny. "You have come to take me away from this awful camp?" I asked, but with her quiet, familiar voice she answered, "No, my child. I have come to give you something because today is your birthday." I came closer and pleaded with her, "Please, I want to come with you. I hate it here. Please take me with you." Her voice became stern when she admonished me to keep my voice down and to listen carefully to what she had to say. "I have walked a great distance and waited here at the gate for many, many days, hoping to see you and to give you a rag doll to keep you company and to give you comfort in days of despair. You left her behind when you were taken away from me, and I know you miss for an Indo child to be in the village with me, especially someone as tall as you are. Do you remember what I have taught you?" Well, Babu Kit was a Muslim and used to tell me about Allah. And then this time she said, you are to be obedient, be thankful for Allah's protection. This too shall pass, God willing, and I know that it is not your destiny to die in this awful concentration camp. Oh, those were the words I needed to hear that day. I was not going to be dying. I was going to be alright. I was not going to die here. Allah would protect me. My dead body was not going to be thrown in a mass grave to rot and to stink with all the others who had died. Dying in a camp had been my fear and nightmares for such a long time. My nanny must have known that I was afraid to die here, and that is why she had come to see me. I felt such a peace come over me. Then very calmly she said, take this doll, protect her, never leave her out of your sight, and she will bring comfort in the days ahead. I knew whatever Nanny told me was truth, and I had learned to be obedient to her at all times. But this time the need for a touch was tremendous, and so I shifted my position and crawled closer to the barbed wire. She handed me the doll, and our hands touched. She stroked my hand, and again I asked her, please, Nanny, take me with you. I want to be with you. I threw the doll aside and reached out for Nanny with both hands, cutting my face against the barbed wire to press my body closer to Nanny, and I could smell her fragrance. I closed my eyes, savoring the seconds of feeling her soft hands caress my face, wiping away my tears. She whispered many endearing words into my ears, but then suddenly and urgently said, I have to go now. You, go quickly. Go away from here quickly. Apparently she saw a sentry coming whom I could not see because my back was turned towards him and I tarried. I could not go. I could not let Nanny go and was holding on to her for one last second, trying to kiss her one more time, and of course, I was not quick enough. The sentry saw us as Nanny scurried away, and perhaps he was thinking that she was escaping from the camp because he took aim and shot my Nanny in the back. Immediately, the sentries on the watchtowers followed suit. Bloody, gaping wounds appeared, but Nanny managed to turn around, faced me, and folded her arms as if to say, as it was all right, before she fell down. In the confusion of the shooting and shouting sentries and the screaming women, which followed the shooting, no one paid attention to me as I stood there in shock, watching my Nanny bleed, hearing her soft whimpering, thinking why I was forced to stand here helpless and could not be with my Nanny to comfort her because a huge barbed wire fence separated us. For years, this horrible bloody scene haunted me because I was convinced that it was my fault that my Nanny died under the hands of the Japanese, even though my mother explained to me then and convinced me years later that Nanny must have known that she was risking her life to come to see me, but that she had done this because she dearly loved me. I was not to feel guilty about her death. Then I understood the meaning that greater love has no man than this, that the man laid down his life for his friends. Mommy reminded me to only remember the good and happy parts of my life that I spent with my Nanny. One thing that stood out was that Nanny taught me was that my soul was of great value in the eyes of Allah. That if I would bring back that soul unspotted by worldly things, then I would have glorified His name. And so from then on, I have tried to be obedient in keeping the Lord's commandment and to be faithful and to pray to my Heavenly Father instead. The days in the concentration camp seemed endless. So many died of starvation and deprivation or of disease. So much cruelty and pain inflicted. It became more and more difficult to focus on a possible future. But my mother kept us going with her unfailing faith, her hope, charity, and trust in the Lord. After 3.5 years, finally D-Day came. We waited so long and prayed so long for this day to come. We had heard rumors that the American General, Douglas MacArthur, had returned to the Philippines as he had promised, and that the Japanese had suffered heavy losses. So we knew that deliverance was nigh, and it came on August 18, when British and Dutch planes flew over the camp, dropping leaflets telling us that Japan had surrendered on August 15, 1945. The war was over, we were free and could leave the camp. However, the Japanese commander admonished us to stay in the camp and offered his troops and sentries to defend us against the Indonesian guerrilla bands that had surrounded all concentration camps with the intention to commit genocide and to massacre all Europeans in hopes to obtain power and independence from the Dutch rule. It was very dangerous to go outside of the camp, and we were to wait to be evacuated with proper military escort. A few women, including two of my mother's friends, decided to strike out on their own and left, but they didn't get far. We heard their horrible screams, their cries for mercy, then a lot of commotion and jubilant voices, followed by bloody body parts that were thrown over the covered bamboo fence on our compound. We were horrified and shocked by all this brutality committed by people who once were our friends and perhaps our neighbors before the war, and now had turned against us to become our enemies. The British asked the Americans who had landed in New Guinea for additional support to protect the civilians and the former POWs. We already knew that the United States of America had combined forces with troops from New Zealand, Australia, and the Sikhs and Gurkhas from India. Yet it was still such a blissful surprise when the Americans came out of the sky, parachute after parachute after parachute. The reason we knew without a doubt that they were Americans was the fact that the paratrooper in the second parachute that was deployed from the plane carried an American flag that furrowed against the blue sky. Although they were a small group among the Allied forces in Indonesia, they wanted us to know that they were Americans and friendly forces. Oh, how we all shouted for joy. We finally could leave this camp and be safe. My mother gathered all of us girls, my little brother, and some motherless children that she had taken care of, pointed to the sky and said, "I want you children to remember always that these young American troops are coming to bring us freedom. Let us thank them and thank our God that they came in time." And oh, I shall never, never forget the treasured sight of the advancing American uniforms and their equipment. The Americans were smiling. They were so friendly, so generous, so gregarious. It was there that I tasted my very first piece of Wrigley chewing gum and a very small piece of Hershey chocolate. The soldiers were so courageous, and as a growing up girl, I thought that they were terribly handsome as well, and of course fell head over heels in love with all of them. Yes, until this very day, until this very hour, I'm still so very much in love with the uniforms of the American Armed Forces. How thankful we are in our family for all the men and the women in the American and Allied forces. I sincerely want to give tribute to all of them, for it was their obedience to the laws of their countries to serve. It was their courage, their sacrifice of life, limbs, and minds that enables me to be alive today, to be able to marry and remarry, to bear children, and even see my grandchildren and great-grandchildren grow up. I'm indeed so indebted to these servicemen and women and their families, yet I feel that I've only done very little to repay them. But may I invoke the Lord's choicest blessings to be upon all the men and women who ever served and are now serving in the American Armed Forces. We in our family have always been so grateful, so deeply thankful that you had chosen a profession that you were willing to put your lives in the lines to save others such as I, to keep America strong and free, and I sincerely and deeply gratefully salute you. Thank you for choosing to serve our country. The political climate changed after the Japanese had surrendered in Indonesia, and the Allied forces did their best to restore some kind of order in the chaotic situation until the Dutch troops arrived from the Netherlands. The Netherlands, or Holland, had been liberated from the Germans on May 5, 1945. We found out that the interim Indonesian government had confiscated all our properties, so we had no home to come home to. My mother found out from the Red Cross that my brother Herman had died in the boys' camp, and that my other brother Danny was seriously ill with cholera in a local hospital. My father had been transported to a military hospital in Soesterberg, the Netherlands, to receive much-needed medical care. It was then that my mother requested evacuation to the Netherlands right after my brother was healed. When we were reunited with our father, we were taken back by the injuries that he had received from his Japanese captors. His left foot had been chopped off in half to prevent him from further escaping from his POW camp. All the nails of his fingers had been pulled out with bamboo slivers. His face was distorted from a jaw not properly healed, and he was so terribly skinny. He was so pleased to see us. Well, during the war, my uncle, his fiancée, my grandfather, my brother, my nanny, and many other close friends died, and my father died not long after from complications of the inflicted injuries. Much to her sorrow and disappointment, my mother was left to take care of herself and the children alone. The Dutch authorities did not honor her pharmacist license because she was born and had studied in the colonies, so she resorted to earn a living by working in a small factory during the day and cleaning offices late at night. My mother never complained that she lost all the properties and wealth. She pulled up her sleeves and went to work, exercising faith and trust in the Lord. It was about a year and a half after the passing of my father that I picked up my rag doll and decided to clean her. After all, she had borne the brunt of my air and car sickness while being transported by military planes and trucks, even a military ship, during our evacuation, and was in terrible shape. Using a nail brush to scrub her, and in doing so the material of the doll disintegrated. As I reached into the stuffing of the doll, trying to fix her up, she yielded more than the soft cotton that she was made out of. My doll revealed the treasure that she had carried all these years, as sapphires and emeralds and diamonds, more diamonds, rubies, pearls, and jade, in rings, bracelets, and necklaces spilled forth. My mother had entrusted the family jewels to my nanny and other faithful and loyal servants to use as they saw fit to barter for food for their families. Because the Japanese immediately confiscated the bank, my mother was not able to use money to pay their wages for their services. And we can only assume that my nanny must have taken the most valuable jewels from my mother's collection, then painstakingly sewed them into my doll, in the belly, the head, and the right leg, then taken the doll to me that cost her life. For virtual penniless refugees living in a 3-room cold flat in Amsterdam, Holland, the discovery of the jewels changed the whole horizon. Not only did they make our lifestyle more comfortable, most of the proceeds of the jewels enabled all of us children to obtain higher education at several universities and a trade school. Have you noticed how the circle is completed? Therefore, all things, whatsoever you would that men should do to you, do even so to them. For this is the law and the prophets. My parents insisted on educating the children of their servants, and now we discovered that one of their servants had sacrificed her life to provide higher education for all my mother's children. Our family settled in and lived in the city of Amsterdam, where I attended the University of Amsterdam studying in elementary education. And it's there that I met my late husband, Ruyter. All through the years at the university, we got along very well, except when we would encounter American servicemen on leave in Amsterdam. My heart literally skipped a beat when I noticed an American uniform, and I stopped with whatever I was doing, even sometimes in the middle of a sentence, and just looked at him, silently thanking him for giving me my freedom. Well, we thought that I flirted with them, but I did not. I just looked at them. But of course, this aggravated Bob to no end. But after a while, it dawned on him that he could not do anything about my attraction. So he resigned himself to it, and instead of getting irritated, he started to point them out to me. And then he'd ask, "Hey, Kitty, does your heart go click, click?" And my answer routinely was, it is going boom, boom, boom. And then we'd laugh. Well, Bobby finally understood the deep gratitude I feel then and still feel now for those serving in the military of the United States of America. Well, this game was played all through our marriage. Even the children picked up on it. We lived in the Bay Area in Northern California during the Vietnam era, so there was a huge influx of servicemen and women coming and going. Thus, this game was played frequently, much to the delight of our children. But what I did not realize was that my children taught their children to play the same game. Allow me to illustrate and share with you just an incident that happened years later when my youngest grandson Nathan was then 3 years old. Bobby and I had been visiting in Huntington Beach and spent the day on the beach when Nathan and I decided to get an ice cream cone on Main Street by the pier. As we were motoring down the street licking our ice cream cone, suddenly Nathan stopped and yelled and said, Oma, does your heart go click, click? It took me by surprise because I did not realize that he knew about this game, nor did I see anybody in a military uniform. Nathan became impatient. There, Oma, right there, next to that truck. You have to say something back to me. Well, I finally discovered what Nathan was so excited about, and I had to tell him that my heart does not go boom boom, nor does it go click click for a man in a UPS uniform. My little guy was so disappointed. My heart sank because my poor little Nathan did not know the difference. So we hastily took him to the Seal Beach Naval Weapon Depot down the PCH that afternoon. Thank goodness there were few men in their utilities, but Nathan now knows the difference. He has seen a few dress uniforms since then. One of the most difficult concepts to teach my children, who were born and raised in the United States, was the concept and the reality of freedom that we enjoy every day here in the United States. Partly, I was not able to choose not to speak about my experience while incarcerated in a Japanese concentration camp until 1983. It was just too painful, and I still suffered from nightmares. However, I did show them to know my love and loyalty to my new country and the military. Since they grew up in the Bay Area, during the Vietnam era, I had taken the children out of school when the SS Enterprise came through the Golden Bridge. We stood there on the bridge, waving flags, throwing flowers and kisses to the sailors and the Marines standing on our deck. We dragged the children to numerous air shows and to military open houses at several bases, even taken them to the Oakmont Naval Hospital in Oakland to visit the wounded that came back from Vietnam. My heart ached by the way our troops were treated by the general public. I wanted desperately my children to understand what it takes to defend our precious freedom, by the sacrifices that were made by the military, and to show our love and appreciation for the military, even though most of the people in America did not at that time. During that time, I was not able to watch the gruesome images from the battlefield on television that came from Vietnam. It was just too horrifying and frightful. However, when the 100-Day War Desert Shield, Desert Storm was televised, I remember being so proud of our troops, how much charity, godly love, and mercy they showed to their enemies. This is what I recorded in my journal. When a Marine was interviewed by CNN and asked why he was involved in this Persian war, he replied without any hesitation, "I'm here, sir, because there is a job to be done. Being a Marine is my job. I'm trained to be a warrior, and I'm confident that I will kick the enemy's backside." He used a different word. Semper Fi. A woman helicopter pilot, an Army Staff Major, was interviewed, and she said she was proud to be in the service. "I worked hard, here I am today. And if I'm to lose my life in the process while doing my duty, so be it." A frightened Iraqi soldier, shaking with fear, squatted, looking up at his American captor, expecting perhaps to receive abuse, but instead, this American GI smiled at him, patted his shoulder, and gave him a package of food and some water, encouraging him to accept it. Whereupon this Iraqi eagerly opened it, bit into the package, completely trusting his enemy, thanking him with tears in his eyes for this gift of life, as it became apparent that he had not eaten nor had any water for a long time. Meanwhile, as you know, we are still embroiled in another war, although the troops are coming home, in the Middle East, in Iraq and Afghanistan. Our brave warriors are still fighting for a just and righteous cause. We still cope, they still cope with the pain and grief over loss of lives, spilled blood, broken bodies and minds suffered in these faraway countries. Look at what they have accomplished. Their cool bravery, their conduct, their confidence, restraint and success on the battlefield. I'm eagerly proud of the troops that stay stateside, holding the fort, protecting our homeland. Is it any wonder why I'm so immensely proud to be an American and love all who ever served or are now serving in the military? Some of you, of course, do not realize that our troops are bound by the code of conduct in which they pledge to give their lives in our defense, if called upon to do so, to preserve our freedom. Yes, my children grew up with the fact that the American flag is shown every day at our house because we are proud to be American citizens by birth or by naturalization. I'm truly thankful to this country, land of the free, because of the brave. Well, this love and patriotism for our country has been embraced by our children and grandchildren, and I'm so proud of my grandson Aaron, a Navy SEAL, who served 2 tours in Iraq. Stephen and Kevin signed up for the Army but never served. Paul's son Kevin, a cadet at West Point Military Academy, on leave to serve a mission for the church, lost his life in Bolivia. Vincent, a lieutenant colonel, served 20 years in the Army. Jeffrey, a major, served 12 years in the Air Force. John, a Navy commander, served 23 years. Paul's grandson Michael, a major, graduated from West Point Military Academy in 2007, served 2 tours as a helicopter pilot in Afghanistan, recently returned from assignment in Chad, Africa. Peter, a second lieutenant, now deployed in South Korea. JJ and Joe, both airmen, served many years in the Air Force. And Spencer, just recently inducted into the Army, is now assigned in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Devon, a proud Marine, served in Afghanistan. We are all a very proud, combined military family. As I previously stated, all my children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren were born in the United States, but I also have had the privilege to have two Japanese sons, Juni Sugimura and Konichi Kokishi, who called me their Oko-san, mother, American mother, and Bob, their other son. They came into our lives in 1983 as exchange students while we lived in California when we were asked to host them for one night because the original host family had changed their minds. We liked them so much that we kept them for the entire school year. Through their unconditional love, they helped me to fully recover on the path of healing from this horrible war. Today, I'm the happiest and most blessed woman on earth. I was a daughter, a wife, I am a wife, a mother-in-law, a stepmother, an auntie, a grand and a great-mother, a sister and a friend. I am and have been married to two most wonderful and amazing husbands. My Bob, who introduced me to the church, and my Paul, who took me on a mission to the Netherlands. When my first husband, Bob, unexpectedly died of a blood clot in his lungs, they call it a pulmonary embolism, after routine knee replacement in 1999, I was devastated with grief and thought that my entire world had caved in. I felt abandoned. I had lost my rudder. Bob was my anchor, and the wind beneath my wings. Because you see, my Bob truly was to me, and I'm quoting and paraphrasing the British poet W.H. Auden. Bob was my north, my south, my east, my west. He was my working week, my Sunday's rest, my noonday hour, my midnight. He was my talk, my song. He was everything to me, and I was married to him for 42 years long. You must have discovered now that I know there is a God who loves us and cares about us. Being alone in that hospital room in need of comfort and desperately looking down on Bob's lifeless body, I testified that I felt loving arms folding around me, and I was lovingly reminded that this separation was only temporary, and that I will see and be with Bob again. And immediately the feeling of peace and calm was draped over my body, and I was comforted and could function well. 3 years later, I believe it was only through heavenly intervention from Bobby and Elaine Bonds that this miracle came to pass. And Paul Bonds, a wonderful and special man, to me truly a knight in shining armor, came into my life. They must have felt that I needed a companion and someone else to love during my last years on earth, so I was blessed. The chances of meeting Paul Bonds were so remote, as Paul lived in Centerville, Utah, and I lived in Huntington Beach, California, some 770 miles apart. Besides, I was not looking for another husband, but how grateful I am that we met, and with the help of modern technology, email to be specific, got to know each other and married 19 years ago. How thankful I am for the miracle of modern technology. You may remember that the troops in the American military have always been my heroes. And wouldn't you know, Paul Martin Bonds spent 32 years in the United States Army. He's a graduate from the United States Military Academy in West Point, where he spent 15 of those 30 years teaching as a full professor of behavioral science and leadership in the psychology department. He even served as a paratrooper or a ranger in the 82nd Airborne Division. Hooah! And I'm married to one of my lifelong heroes. I never thought or dared to dream that I would actually become an American soldier's wife. You see, miracles never cease. Before we married, Paul warned me that when I married him, I also married West Point. Yes, I found out that to Paul, West Point is not only his life, it is his soul. Duty, honor, country is in his blood. On our wedding day, Paul surprised me and wore his military dress uniform. Quite a feat for a man who had taken off the uniform 20 years earlier in 1984 when he retired as a full colonel from the United States Army. I was so proud of him that the uniform still fit him so well. However, his tailor told him that this was the last time that he could let out the pants of his uniform. But oh, did my heart ever go click, click, and boom, boom during the entire wedding reception. My dear military friends, and family and friends who are dear, I fully understand that these kinds of miracles that happened in my life may not have been part of your life so far. However, I would like to encourage all of you to look back for little miracles and small tender mercies you did or will receive. You may have forgotten some of them or put them on the back burner. Even though you and I had trials and tribulations in the past to overcome, in fact, or still are, we are still going through perilous and unusual times. That is not, because of COVID-19, that is not entirely eradicated. And we may have more hard times coming up our way. But don't you agree that life is still good, that life is still worth living? I'm so grateful to be alive, to be loved, and to be able to love others. We have been sent on this earth to be tested, and therefore we need to develop an attitude of gratitude, to have confidence and courage, faith and hope, and to be patient, to be able to endure hard things, all the while remembering that somehow, someday, in due time, all these things shall pass away. I promise you that better days are ahead of us, but we have to stay vigilant and live by truth. Meantime, we need to appreciate openly and support and give thanks to each and every day for those in the military who are presently stationed at home or involved in battles around the world to protect the freedom of our future. America the beautiful is a choice land above all other lands, and the freedom of her citizens need to be protected from the enemies within as well as enemies outside our borders. I believe that we need to give thanks to our God for whatever your choice of religion may be, for those who valiantly fought in the past to protect the freedom that we are now enjoying at this very moment. I thank you, veterans, from the bottom of my heart for your love of country and your service to this country. You are truly my heroes. You fully understand that freedom is never free. Someone always has to pay the price for it. Thank you for protecting my freedom. May the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you, be gracious unto you. The Lord lift his countenance upon you and give you peace. May the star-spangled banners always proudly wave over this, the United States of America, land of the free and of the brave. And may God always bless America. I do say this. Thank you.